and trusting God with our money and stuff, and asking God to help us be more generous. And so I've got an interesting story. I'm reading several books to help me understand things for this series, and one of the books is written by Pastor Randy Alcorn. You might have heard of him. He wrote a book about heaven, but he also wrote this book about money. And he stopped at a convenience store one time, and it was a really hot day, and he was thirsty, so he was going to grab for me in this convenience store, but he doesn't see anyone, so he walks outside. Gets outside, and there's this homeless-looking dude with long, stringy hair, sandals, looks in his 30s, sort of, and he wasn't there when he walked in, so Randy knows that this is God's assignment for him, or thinks anyway. So he asks the young man if he can get him something to drink, because it's really hot, and the guy looks really warm, and he says, no, I'm fine. And he says, I'm John. He hands out his hand, puts out his hand and says, I'm John, and he says, I'm Randy. And so he looks at him intently, this John guy, and he looks at Randy, and the first thing that he says to him is, are you a servant of Yeshua Adonai? If you know Hebrew, which Pastor Randy did, that means Jesus, the great Lord. Lord God, Jesus. And so he recognizes it, and he says, yes, I am a servant of Yeshua Adonai. And then John puts his hand on Randy's shoulder and starts to pray for him. And he prays for him things that, of course, he doesn't know about him because he's never met him before. And in fact, it's the deepest, most meaningful prayer that anybody's ever prayed for Randy in his entire life. And this is his encounter with this young man. And then at the end, he doesn't know what to do. So he says, hey, can I still get you something to drink and something to eat? So they walk inside, and he gets him a bag of chips and a bottle of water. It costs $4.50. And so John said, I got to go. He leaves. Pastor Randy says goodbye. He gets in his car, and he weeps because he feels like he's met an angel. Or maybe Jesus himself. And the last thing that John said to him was, I'll see you again. And Randy knows he will see this man again in heaven someday. And he said, that was the most important $4.50 I've ever spent. And just by him being generous and looking for God to work, he has this encounter that I can't explain. So just a story to encourage you to be generous. And I'm going to switch gears to our sermon today about moving from anxiety about our finances or anything else to trusting God. My question is, how would you feel if you logged onto your bank account and you know that your check had just been deposited, whatever you get, whether it's Social Security or pension or paycheck or whatever, and it has zero? Your checking account has zero. Or like me when I logged on and they said, our online banking isn't working. How would you feel if you went and checking your account, it's zero? Would you be anxious? I would. And until you figured out where the money was. And in reality, money is one of the greatest causes of stress for most Americans. It's found, one study found, it's the number one cause of sleeplessness. Concerns about our finances is our number one cause of sleeplessness. I know that we're anxious, but Jesus said a lot about money and stuff and about anxiety and fear. And so the verses I want to show you are about, from Matthew 6, Jesus said, don't worry about these things, saying, what will we eat? What will we wear? These things dominate the thoughts of unbelievers, but your heavenly Father already knows all your needs. Seek the kingdom of God above all else and live righteously, and he will give you everything you need. So don't worry about tomorrow, because tomorrow will bring its own worries. Today's trouble is enough for today. You've probably heard those verses before, maybe many times. And it would be wonderful if we could believe those words and not worry, but it is hard. Somehow our money and our stuff give us security and maybe a sense of control over our lives. But our belief that we should control our finances sometimes leads to greater anxiety and not less. And the solution, the road to freedom from anxiety, being able to trust God, is about Him being our provider now and in the future. And I get how tough it is. Most of us can't make ends meet. One study by the Federal Reserve, no less than the Federal Reserve, found that 46% of Americans wouldn't be able to cover a $400 emergency, like your water heater or some part of your car goes off. 46% of Americans would not be able to, they don't have that reserve. We don't have that much reserve. And we'd have to borrow money to pay it off over time. But Jesus says, even knowing all that, we're supposed to find our peace in Him, no matter what worries we have for tomorrow. Pastor Rick Warren says, worry is a form of idolatry, because when you worry, you're saying it depends on you. I hate that when pastors say things like that. I mean, I'm a pastor, but I still hate it when people say things like that, because, like, fine, it's idolatry, but I still worry. It's hard. Sometimes we'll worry whether we'll have enough money to pay our bills today, or we'll worry about having enough money in the future. So this kind of parable Jesus told is very interesting. I'm going to tell you a parable that He told, and He starts by saying, the slide that's up there, or will be up there, to tell people to guard against every kind of greed. Sorry, I'm not adept with my pages today. He said, guard against every kind of greed. So if you think about that kind of overall injunction from Jesus, it's like putting a guard at the door of your house. You know, imagine that you've got one of those, like in England when they have the guards that guard, the queen, and they have the big red hats and they carry the sword or whatever. Imagine having a guard at your heart to guard you against greed. He tells this parable about a rich man who has a fertile farm and produced fine crops, kind of like the fields look right now. And he said to himself, what should I do? I don't have room for all my crops. What a problem to have, huh? And he says, I know, I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Then I'll have room enough to store all my wheat and other goods. And I will sit back and I'm going to say, eat, drink, and be merry. Take it easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. And God said, you fool, you will die this very night. Who will get everything you worked for? And then Jesus said this, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God, or isn't rich towards God in another translation. Well, that's kind of a hard story. I can't imagine how the people reacted. I imagine they didn't just cheer when He told that story. They probably went, what are you doing? Are you pointing at me, Jesus? What? Not me. We're supposed to not worry about our physical needs. They're not supposed to make our financial security the important thing, to the detriment of our relationship with God. And that guy, that parable guy, instead of tearing down his barns and being builder barns, what if that extra he would have given away to the poor? Because Jesus says we're always going to have poor with us. And we're supposed to be generous to the poor. And there are great needs out there. I didn't put a slide. I looked at a bunch of slides last night at children starving, and I chose to not do that because you know what it looks like. But there's 700 million people in the world in poverty, 40 million in the U.S., 40 million in the U.S. 90 million people are hungry, and 9 million will die from hunger this year. I think I told you the most meaningful class I ever took in my undergrad at Wisconsin was a class on the world food situation. As a future dietitian, I wanted to understand that. And they had professors come in, an agronomy professor come in, and a food science professor, and a political science, from every different discipline. And what we heard again and again and again was, we have the resources. And this was, I'm old, in the 70s. We had the resources in the 70s to solve world hunger. But because of the political problems and the conflicts between nations, we weren't solving it. So 780 million people don't have access to clean water. So what do we do? I'm going to tell you a story about a man. He's still alive. He's like 106 right now. His name is Stanley Tam. he became a believer at a young age and became a businessman, and he founded United States Plastic Corporation, and this is probably in the 40s, when plastics were just coming on the market, and the business failed. He went broke, and he said, God, you have anything for me? And he heard God tell him that if he would give God the business, he would be a success. So he officially made God his 51% partner. And that's one of the books he wrote. He wrote several books. And he gave the stock, he gave the 51% he promised God. He gave it all to God's kingdom. He figured God ran the business and he was the employee. What a cool idea, right? God's running this church and I'm just an employee. That's the truth. He heard about an amazing international ministry that was closing one day because it didn't have enough money. And he called them and he said, if I would trust God to give you $50,000 a year, would you start at the ministry again? And they said yes. And that ministry is still going now, giving Bibles to people and sharing the gospel in 42 countries. And in 2016, more than 140,000 people came to know Jesus. And lots and lots and lots of churches have been started in places that never had churches. One day, Stanley's tooling it along, with God as 51% owner of his business, and he hears God telling him to give him the whole business. Not just 51%, but 100%. And so he struggled with this. He said, I'm not some saint. I struggle with it. My wife struggled with it. We prayed, and he and Juanita agreed and gave 100% of the company to God, all of the profits. He took a modest salary. I think, and so this is probably starting in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s. Probably retired in the 90s. He took $78,000. And if you understand CEO salaries, that's a pittance for CEOs who make millions and millions of dollars. That's what he took, and that's all he took. When he retired, he opened up a little woodworking shop down the street from his company, and he advertised free Bibles as well as honest work. Now he's living in a retirement home. He prays every day, and he tells people about Jesus. The new president of his company, whose name Wes Littell, says they're like other companies. They want to make as much money as they can, but to be able to give away as much money as they can for the glory of Jesus and the good of others. Now, that's an example of something that you probably are saying, well, that's not me. But if you make more than $5.50 a day, you're richer than 3.4 billion people in the world. 3.4 billion people in this world live on less than $5.50 a day. And I want to just tell you that you are so unique. Only you have access to the friends that you have, the family that you have, your people at the club, if you exercise, people at work, that you work, people that you hang out with. Only you have that circle, nobody else. And so you are the one who can bless people. You have a mission field as a teacher, as a coach, as an uncle, as a mentor, as a friend. You have a mission field. So use whatever position you find yourself in to bless people. I have a slide, I think, up here about blessing. To pray for them, listen to them, eat with them, serve them, and tell them about Jesus. After you do all the other things. Eat with them. Pray for them, listen to them, serve them, and give generously to help God's work and serve the poor. You will receive incredible joy. Jesus said, give and you will receive. Your gift will return to you in full, pressed down, shaken together to make room for more, running over and poured into your lap. The amount you give will determine the amount you give back. Another story in this book was about a woman that probably more relevant to our example. This young couple, actually not so young, they're probably in their 30s or 40s, they wanted to buy a house, and it was so hard. And so they saved up for years and years, lived with their parents, saved up for years and years to have $10,000 as a down payment. And that was what they needed. They found a tiny house, $10,000, they were going to get their house. And the wife one day heard God say, as she knew one of her friends was in great crisis, give your friend $5,000 of those $10,000. And she said, are you kidding me, God? I've just saved for years to be able to have my own house. So she talked to her husband, and he said, I think that's God. We can help your friend dramatically with that $5,000. So they gave the $5,000 to their friend. And she cried, and she cried, and she cried. And one day she stopped crying. And her husband was surprised, not because she was crying, but because she stopped crying. And she said, I just have peace. God's giving me peace. I'm going to trust him. And that next day in the mail, a check for $5,000 came. She'd been working without pay, helping her mom start a business. And her mom paid her $5,000. Mom didn't know that she'd given the $5,000 away, but God did. Now, I can't promise you that that's what's going to happen. I cannot promise you that that's what's going to happen when you're generous. But I talked to somebody recently. A few years ago, I gave her some money. And she said she has given that money back to 4 different people. Because when I gave it to her, I said, I don't want the money back. Just bless other people. Pay it forward. She has paid it forward with 4 people. What she doesn't know is this all started with Kathy Schiffer in Eau Claire. Our friends were living in an abandoned farmhouse. It was abandoned. They moved in and fixed it up. They were dairy farmers. They had no life. It's like we're going to milk the cows early in the morning and late at night, and had beef as well. They were just faithful people. Well, Mark and I were newlyweds, and we were really broke. And this is in the 80s, early 80s, and they gave us $100. I don't know, by your calculator, somebody is going to go on Google and figure out what that's worth today. But it was like $1,000 or $2,000 to us. And Kathy said, I don't want it back. That's before paying it forward. Those words were in, She just said, I don't want it back. I just want you to bless somebody else. So that's what began to change my life in the 80s. And we've been able to bless some people and not necessarily gotten anything back from it at the time except joy. How can you put a price tag on joy and peace and knowing God's love and knowing that you're doing the right thing? So I encourage you to bless people, pray for them, eat with them, listen to them, help them, even if it's $5. What if you're at a restaurant and you pay somebody, like there's a family and their kids are running around and acting crazy? Instead of being critical of them, which would be my first choice, probably, like, what if they control their kids? Forgetting that my kids were just like that when they were little. How about paying for their bill? Because they're obviously having a tough day. Or you see a mom and her kids, or a dad and his kids. How about paying for them? It will help you open your hands with your finances. Hold on to things less tightly if you give things away. Hold on to less tightly, more loosely. So try God. Ask him. Maybe give a little bit more than you've been giving. I don't know what you give. I don't ever know what people give. Thank goodness. That's something that Shelley handles and the other people who count the money. I don't know what anybody gives. But if you normally give, 5% of what you make, maybe make 6%. I have to tell you, I was sitting there in the pew so many times when I heard pastors say this, and I was resentful towards them. So if you're resentful towards me right now, I can take it. Because I've been there. And I've said, I remember coming up to pastors and saying, we're talking before or after taxes, and them just shaking their heads at me. Because it mattered to me, and I was calculating, and it didn't work. I get it. I get it. So hear me, I am not shaming you. I don't know what's between you and God about money. I don't know how anxious you are about money. I will tell you that I've spent a bunch of sleepless nights worrying about money. And at some point, things switched for me. I think when you have physical challenges and you find yourself taking a scooter, like yesterday when the power dies in the rain, oh yeah, in front of Petco or something, and the only way it would work would be to go 0.025 miles an hour. God's faithful in making me humble. He just is. And so I'm tooling along, saying, Mark, don't go ahead of me. Please stand with me so I don't feel so silly. And we're parked on the other side of Home Depot, and we're going to Marshall's. Yeah, it was fun. When your life is like that, and you're dealing with such things as that, the worrying about finances sort of falls away. Doesn't mean that I don't care. It doesn't mean that I don't pay attention. It doesn't mean that I'm not careful with what I spend. What I'm saying is that just your priorities just become a little bit different. So take it from me, home scooter girl, to ask God for help. If you're not making ends meet, asking God for help. And I have two parts to this. Part one is asking God for help. Part two is telling other people, some safe people in your life. It's hard to admit. I was on a teleconference this week with 5 other women pastors in the covenant. Almost all of us cried telling personal stories because it was a safe place. There were things I don't talk to anybody about, not to even to Mark about, but we were safe with each other. I hope I'm a safe person to you, and I hope you have safe people in your life that you can tell things to, because it helps so much not to keep it all in. I have a friend this week told me about, she had a 20-some-year-old mattress. And if you know mattresses, you're supposed to, the mattress people tell you you're supposed to change them every 7 years. I don't know whether it's true or not. But she's having back problems. And so she's been praying for a long time for a new mattress. And this week, a friend called her, a woman she knows, called her and said, hey, do you know anybody who needs a mattress? It was a king-size mattress. My friend needed a king-size mattress. She said, it was hard for her to say this, but she said, well, I do. She said, cool, because it was his friend's sister was getting one of those fancy beds, that go up and down and whatever. They didn't need that king-size bed. So it was like a 3-year-old mattress. She got it, and then she was able to bless her son's friend with a new mattress. Now, she's praying for other things where she hasn't gotten answers yet, but the thing is, pray. You never know how God's going to answer, and tell somebody. It's so important to share things with people. We have resources here to help people with needs. And I'd love to pray for you. What I'm saying is an adventure awaits us. If we hold tightly onto our money and stuff, and we're anxious, that's not a fun adventure at all. But if we open our hands and we tell God and we tell somebody else, that verse I think about, cast your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Why? Not because he's going to shame you or beat you up or yell at you or make you more anxious. He cares for you. So money is something that will help us learn to trust God more. And one way is by being generous with our money and stuff. That will decrease its power over us. And as we give her, we'll get back from God. Not necessarily money. I'm not a prosperity gospel person. We will have a closer relationship with God and learn his character better and believe that he loves us. So my last question for you is, what is God's invitation for you today? Is he asking you to trust him with something, a person, a relationship, thing that you own? Is he asking you to give more generously? Is he asking you to share your stuff with others? Is he asking you to pray for him to meet your needs or tell somebody about your need? Let's pray.